House of Love on WNOV 860 AM, 106.5 FM on The Voice, the only black-owned radio station in Wisconsin. I am your host, Kwaku Amawasi, joined in by the best, Jermaine Rideout and Carvey P. How we doing this morning, fellas?
Man, I'm blessed, man. I'm blessed.
Let me tell you, this is how blessed I am, man. My mom hasn't been doing too well. We've been in the hospital the last couple of days. But, man, she still knew I had to do my P and Ps. We literally just left the hospital. She said, let me pray for you before I go in. So it's like, when somebody pray for you is one thing. But when you see them down and they need some prayers themselves. So I'm saying that for all of Milwaukee that you hear, put my mom in your prayers. And not just my mom, but everybody that need prayers. And guess what? Pray for those people who don't even know that they need it or might not admit that they need it. So that's everybody. But I want to do that. And she also is in the tradition of our ancestors have given me permission to speak. So, hey, I'm excited to be here. I'm missing my co-host, Dr. Alicia Moutry, but we still going to make it happen. I can't say anything but beautiful things about my sister. Miss her to death, but we still going to make things happen. As we come up on the eve of Martin Luther King Day, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we did is we talk about that being a day on. And we just want to make sure that that's just not a day on Martin Luther King Day. We want this to be a day on for the rest of the year. Not just for the rest of the year, for the rest of our lives. We got to pay that rent every day, and that rent is service to stay on this earth. So when we start thinking about that, I want you to go. But as we talk about this, usually I try to think of who's an ancestor that I want to dedicate the show to, that I want this show to have the spirit of, to be able to feel. And when I started to think about that, it was so many people, Carvey, because you think about Martin Luther King, and sometimes I get a little mad at Martin Luther King Day because we hype King up, which he should be. He's a leader extraordinaire. But Karis One had a song on the blueprint. He said, man, as bad as King was, if he didn't have the army behind him, he couldn't do anything. So it's not just one man, but it's the army. And so I started to think about like his homeboy, Robert Abernathy. I started to think of people like Dorothy Heights, Jimmy Lee Jackson, allies like James Reed, excuse me. I think of Martin Luther King's mother, Alberta King, who was assassinated herself by a confused brother, Marcus Chenault. But then I want to also give shout outs to living legends like Claudette Colvin, who's the original Rosa Parks that they said they couldn't use because maybe she didn't have the background being a pregnant, unwed mother, even though she was discriminated against. She didn't fit the profile that could be sympathetic, which is another thing we had to work with. But I want to give her love. And I want to thank Queen Mother Janetta Herrera for introducing me to my fraternity brother, the Reverend Al B. Sampson, who did the keynote speak at the MLK Day the other day. And what he was talking about was, and we've heard this on the show a couple of times, he said, you can have a rap, but without a map, it don't make no sense. He said, you could talk a good game, you could talk about it, but if you don't be about it, it don't matter. But also who I like to really put this show in dedication to, Brother Jermaine, is Addie Mae Callens, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley. And you said, well, who are those names? Sometimes we don't know these names by names, but we know them as the 4 little girls who were killed in the Birmingham bombing. And it was interesting because that happened on September 15th, 1963. Why is that important? Because it was in August 1963 when they talk about King. That was that what? I have a dream speech. The world was like, oh, we changing, we doing it. And then right away, what happened? They had something to show you, it really ain't changing. So just oppose that to what's going on right now. 2008, when he was first coming out, what did they say about Obama? They said, oh, now that Obama is here, this is a post-racial society. We ain't got to worry about racism no more. It's over. But what was the next thing that they did? They gave us Trump. We had 4 years of Trump where he got to ride the wave of Obama's economy and everything, and it looked like he was doing okay. But then when a real disaster came in COVID, he showed his incompetence. And not only did he show his incompetence, he showed his ass and ignorance on the way out. Because when we start thinking about January 6th and the insurrectionists, and we're looking at this and say, what has happened to the peaceful passing of power in this democracy? But 4 years later, the people voted this man back in. And you know what's the crazy part? We had some real viable options that were good. I mean, that were good. And I'm not really for duopoly, and I'll be honest, some people might get a little mad. I'm not for the Republicans or the Democrats. I think they two fangs are the same snake.
Yeah.
So you say, well, how they have other options if this duopoly wasn't there? Well, I said, look at those third party candidates, those other people who were talking. But we say, oh, they ain't got a chance, so we ain't gonna vote for them. I was like, well, if we don't ever do something, that's the definition of insanity. If you do the same things over and over again and expect different results. But that's what we did. And not only did we get the lesser of two evils, we got the worst of two evils. But I got somebody in today who I believe is going to be able to give us some ideas on where do we go from here, answering that call of Dr. Martin Luther King. And when I talk about who do we have here today, this was actually, well, let me read this bio and see if the people can guess. Today we have Dr. Melina Abdullah. She is a professor of Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA's College of Ethnic Studies, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. And right now she is over the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, the Los Angeles and Black Lives Matter Grassroots, where she's also the director. She's a leader in the California faculty. That's their faculty union for both locally and statewide. She's a mother of three. Dr. Abdullah earned her PhD from USC in political science, and she's got a BA from Howard. And I know my wife is going, HU in African American studies. She's offered numerous articles and book chapters. She's known, if you're looking on Instagram, as Doc Melly Mel. She is a creator and host and producer of radio programs. In fact, she has a show on Tavis Smiley's KBLA Talk 1580 called This Is Not a Drill. She's a recognized expert on race, gender, class, and social movements. And this is it right here. In April of 2024, Abdullah was announced as the vice presidential pick for my man, Dr. Cornel West, in his run for president of the United States. And Jermaine, they ran on the platform of this: truth, justice, and love.
Wow.
Truth, justice, and love. And the people rejected that. They didn't want that. Because America, we can't handle the truth. You talk about Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth. When we tell the truth, it's just hard.
Yeah.
But what I love about justice is you look at people like Francis Cress Welsing, her mentor, Neely Fuller. He always talks about how do we bring down white supremacy and racism. He said the only way we bring that down is with justice, because really that lies at the heart of the matter of white supremacy is this level of injustice. So if we bring justice, we heal all of those ills. And I was always taught that love is the medicine that heals every wound. One thing that was special about their candidacy is this was the first one that was a black man and a black woman on the ballot, a black Christian and a black Muslim, and she was the first Muslim to run for vice presidency. So I said, never would we would have had a more educated group. Never more would we would have had a group that was so filled with compassion and love towards all of mankind, both on domestic and foreign fronts. It's just amazing to me. But what I would like to do is welcome Dr. Melina Abdullah to the Nyumba Upendo show. How you doing, Queen? Do we got her on yet, Carvey?
She should be.
Hear me okay?
Oh, we can hear you now. Now it's coming.
Okay.
How you doing today?
Good. To your wife. Yeah.
I know you was going to say,
I was trying to say it, but I was muted. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be with you this morning, brother.
No, I appreciate you being on, Queen. I appreciate you being on. And I hope you got to hear the full part of that introduction, because it was the absolute, like real meaning of my heart. We always talk about we want something different in America, but yet we keep voting for the same things. But before we go into the interview, I just want to ask you, because I know you're out in LA. How are you all doing with the fires right now?
Dr. Right now, and I hope that can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Queen.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm in transit because I'm actually going to help with recovery right now. So where I live and where most Black people live in Los Angeles, we're not directly impacted by the fires themselves, although the air quality and toxicity in the water is hitting all parts of Southern California. But we're actually heading to Pasadena, where one of our Panther elders, Brother Martin Gordon, his home burned down. And he also runs the Pasadena Community Coalition. So he just is recovering, trying to find his footing from having lost his entire home. And his way of doing that is opening back up his center. So that's where we're headed right now, to help him clean out and organize the center in Pasadena. So we're still reeling, we're still in the midst of it, but especially our one of the most historic Black communities in this nation in Altadena is feeling it more than anybody else. And yeah, we're not okay yet.
No, you know that's the moniker because we know it's bad for everybody in LA. But they said when the white man has a cold, the black man has a flu. And that's what I was curious about, if the distribution of the generosity of the people was being spread equally, if our communities were somehow again in a disproportionate place when it comes to those volunteering those emergency funds that were being put in. But kudos to you. My grandmother always used to tell me, she said, the best way to heal yourself is to help others. And when we talk about the magnanimous nature of our people, it's like even in our despair, even in our hurt, we still find a way to try to flip it to be able to bring good to others and to the masses, because that's what we do. So please be careful as you travel this road. And if you need to leave a little early or anything like that, please let me know.
Well, my brother Billion is driving, so I'm not trying to be that
Okay.
big of a multitasker.
Okay.
I'm riding in the car. Right.
So let me ask you this, because I do work with the Olympics, and so when we were over in Paris, they did a big thing to try to remove some of the homelessness. So like when the cameras came, it could look like a little bit more of a humane center in place than what it actually was. And so I'm curious about, as the games moved towards LA, there was some speculation that the games might be moved. There was some speculation that maybe because the games was there, that might even help in recovery and resources. I was wondering if that organization and institution has done some things to be able to help the city, especially in the neighborhoods that might be a bit more impoverished.
Absolutely not. And so there's speculation around here that, some of the displacement of Black communities, especially, actually is, if you go all the way down the road, they'll say it's because of the Olympic Games, right? But even without the fires, what we're seeing in places like downtown Los Angeles, our Skid Row, which is 80% Black, is a criminalization of our unhoused communities and a kind of sweeping up of poverty so that it makes the city look more palatable, more comfortable for those who are coming in. So we are not seeing any benefits to the Olympics. The Olympics are actually causing more harm, and we're seeing really a desire by a lot of city officials, especially those who are controlled by corporate interests, to really criminalize and bring harm to Black communities, displace Black communities. We don't see any benefits coming for Black people in the city to the Olympics.
Okay, well, we're going to talk offline about that and see what some things we might be able to do as we go from the painful to even more painful. We look at the tyranny that has begun. And I'm not afraid of what's about to happen in the next 4 years, because I know our ancestors have gone through much. I know the power that resides in us. I know the persistence and the perseverance that we have. And I know we will make a way, but I also know that though we can get over obstacles and hurdles, there will be obstacles and hurdles. I want to know what are your thoughts on just these first few days of this new President 47 being in office, whether it goes back to the birthright citizen, right, with these executive orders, the freeing of the insurrectionists, the leaving of WHO and the Paris Climate Accords. What's your thoughts on some of these early actions?
Woo! Are you keeping up with it? I mean, this is knocking us back on our heels, right? Like at every turn, all of the work that we've done is he's seeking to undo it. And I think it's blatant unmasked white supremacy, blatant unmasked capitalism. And for him to have the nerve to invoke Dr. King during his speech, right? I think that lightning should have struck him a few times for that, right? Because every one of the evils that Dr. King talks about is something that Donald Trump and all of those who roll with him embody. They are the incarnation of evil. And so I think that when we think about everything from mass deportations to the undoing of DEI to the Elon Musk, the unelected president, actually giving the Nazi
Hail
community
Hitler. Come on.
right,
In plain sight.
right,
Not
in
even
plain
apologetic trying to
sight.
hide it.
No, and not once, not twice, but three times apparently. Um, and it's just absolutely disgusting and should remind us that they have declared war. They've declared war. They've declared war on black people, on brown people, on indigenous people, on poor people. They've declared war. And so we cannot sit here and be quiet and act like this is normal. This is not normal, and so we got to make sure that we are ready, that we are armed. And I mean that in the spiritual and intellectual and every other sense, that we are armed, that we are unified, that we are organized, and we are prepared, that we are prepared to fight back against the terrible things that they have planned for us.
And it's so amazing that you say that, because when King talked about those three ills, those three evils of militarism, racism, and capitalism, you're right. You hit it on the head. Those are all of the things that he's attacking. I mean, he told everybody he was going to be a dictator from day one, and he didn't disappoint and he didn't lie. And so it's like we know what we were getting, but yet the people still voted for it. And I guess it hurts all of us. But as a person who actually ran, and I know we're coming close to a commercial break, so I want you to think about this, like as we come back, as a person who actually ran, and you thinking like what we would have did for day one, what we would have did for up to day 100 to help the people running on that platform of truth, justice, and love. I want you to tell the people what some of the things that we could have had if we would have just thought about going outside of the duopoly for once. So think on those things when we come back. We'll be right back on the Nyumba Upendo show on WNOV 860 AM, 106.5 FM, the voice of Milwaukee. We love you, Milwaukee.
Need more
Upendo show. That means House of Love on WNOV 860 AM, 106.5 FM. I'm Kwaku Amo. I see your host, and I am joined in the studio by my man Jermaine Ride out in Carvey P. But on the phone, we are blessed to have vice presidential candidate of the 2024 presidential race, Dr. Melina Abdullah. She was the vice president to our own dear brother, Dr. Cornel West. And right before we had left, our conversation, we were talking about some of the stuff that Trump has done already, and we talk about what could have been, what we might have missed. We heard some of the stuff from Sister Kamala's agenda, which was much better than Trump's. But Dr. Abdullah, if you could tell us what were some of the things that you and brother Dr. West had in store for our family of the U.S. We lost Dr. Abdullah for a second, so we're going to keep going. But what I want us to think about is this. If you remember back on January 6, 2021, when they stormed the White House, because this was something she alluded to earlier, what had happened was this. There were men armed, fighting the police, but not just armed and fighting the police. They had different signage. Yeah, it was Trump. It wasn't USA, it was Trump. But very clear on there, it said what? Civil War, January 6, 2021. And you know, Maya Angelou told us, she said, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. Not the third time, not the second time, but the first time. Since January 6, 2021, since the election of 2020, Trump has denied that he's lost. And he started campaigning the same very day when everything was going on saying that he lost. So he said, you know what? I lost, but I'm not coming back. But guess what I'm gonna do? I'm a campaign for the.
I think you're muted for me if
Oh,
I'm
okay,
supposed to
Dr.
be able
Abdullah,
to
we
hear
hear your
you.
voice. We hear your voice, and I apologize for that conflict. We were just talking about how Trump afterwards, they said that it was going to be a civil war. And he started campaigning for the last 4 years to get ready for this date. And they told us a civil war was coming, and it's here. I wanted to ask you, what were some of the things that you and Dr. West had in store for us from a domestic and a foreign policy standpoint?
I can't. I don't know if you're muted for me.
Okay, we're having a little technical difficulty. They're gonna work it out, but I think you can hear me, so I'm gonna keep saying it. So when you come on, you make sure you just get in where you fit in, which I know you can do. And my whole thing was, it was so crazy because when they talk about third parties, they say, well, you only hear from them, every fourth year, and they were really talking
I
about Jill
can't hear.
Stein with that. And so what I want us, when you come back, Dr. Dula, I want us to start to think about this. What can we do for campaigns like yours and Dr. West, where it doesn't die down in these 4 years, where we can build up momentum, build a party. So not only do we have a presidential candidate, but when we start to look at the House and the Senate, we have people who are sick of the duopoly and say, I want to do something else. I want another option. I want another choice. And because you ran on true justice and love, and you created that Fred Hampton, that Jesse Jackson Rainbow Coalition, how we might all be able to come to galvanize. And that's why I want you to be able to talk about the platform so people can say, oh, you know what? I see why the radio stations and the news stations didn't want this said, because this would have been a true threat to not only the Republicans, but also the Democrats. Because when I look at it, I'm so frustrated about the things I hear. One of the things that I love that
You
you and Dr.
just bringing
West had
up
talked about
bad.
so
I'm
much
telling them I'm in
from
the
a
car.
foreign domestic
I'll be
standpoint,
at this
you weren't
soon as this is
afraid
over.
to talk about what had happened in Palestine and Israel and the conflict. And I know people are happy about the ceasefire, but there's still occupation that's going on. There's still a current genocide that's going on. And just like all of the other wars that have subsided, we know they always come back. We even see how they frame October 7th as the day the war started, but they don't want to talk about really everything from 1948 that came through. Dr. Abdullah, they're asking if your volume is all the way up, because it appears that everything is good from our end. And I want the people to get to hear your voice, because you say so many prominent things. And I'll tell you why you're listening. I know if you're a little frustrated that you can't hear a voice, I want you to go into YouTube and just type in Dr. Melina Abdullah. Okay. Dr. Abdullah, if you can call into the station, something's going on. We can, if you could call in at 414-444-5253. If you can call that number 414-444-5253, we'll just do it as a traditional telephone call. So we apologize for that. But as we wait for that, what I want you to do is I want you to think about go into talking to. I want you to think about going into the YouTube. I want you to think about going into the YouTube, looking up Dr. Melina Abdullah. I want you to see her. Oh, you know what? She was on the documentary 13. So when you think about that, and that gives you another one of the platforms, because that talks about our prison industrial complex. It talks about the criminalization, the disproportionate representative of specifically black men, but black and brown men, and black and brown and poor men from the white brothers, this action. How we have all of these people locked up. And with that locked up, you know what comes? It comes the prison industrial complex where they're able to take this money from us. But as we talk about those three evils of King, the military, the capitalism, and the racism, those are all of those things wrapped into one that allows this machine to go. But these are the people who we continue to vote for. And what I like to do is I like to put in my thing for everybody to think about, why am I for this? Because one of the things on their platform also was to get a minimum wage up to like $27 an hour. Sometimes we hear a push for 15, but I want you to think about these numbers. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, minimum wage is $7.25. $7.25. And it's been that way since 2009. They said even if we didn't change minimum wage, but just adjusted for inflation, it should be at $10.84. The last time I remember when I was working in 1988, it was $3.35. 2008, it was $6.50. But I want you to think about this. If I make $7.25 an hour, I make $15,080 a year. That means the poverty level is at $14,000. So think, if I make minimum wage as a single person, I'm at the poverty level. But if I have children, what does that do to me? A livable wage is what, for 2 adults and 3 children, you must make $41 an hour. Think about that, $41 an hour. And we got people making what? $7.25? In Wisconsin, if we make $18 an hour, you know where we rank out of the 50 states?
What's that?
50th.
And that's crazy because I don't know how they think people supposed to survive and live off this type of stuff. Like, if you're not making the money to get the food and the clothing and the housing that you need just to make ends meet, how do you expect to survive and make it through this world if you're making $7 an hour and 15,000 a year? That's no money.
So let's say you got 2 parents and we working hard, we working 40 hours a week, but we both make minimum wage and we got 4 children.
Yeah.
We make $30,160 a year. Where poverty level is $30,000 for that. And that's like depending on where you live, because cost of living is different for other people.
Right.
So now we got to start thinking about, if a rich person like Luigi can kill somebody, start to think about somebody who working hard and they desperate.
Yeah.
And so you say, now I see why the conditions are what they are. So when we start to look inside our mind and say, well, these people are over policed. But the reason why they're over policed is not because it's a disproportionate number of crime. The reason why these people are committing crimes is because of the high level of power and is not even able to live. Think about what was going on in these places when catastrophe comes. All other things that people say, they always say, guess what? We don't want to go ahead here and do this, but this is where we were kind of forced to go to. And so when we start to think about what we need to do, if we don't have a level of income inequality, this is just going to mess with us even more. So what I want us to think about is this. We're working on trying to get Dr. Abdullah back. So I appreciate your patience with us over here at WNOV. We're trying to make it happen. But the whole thing, whether it's Dr. Abdullah and Dr. West up on there, it's still, we have to worry about this. Who is going to be among us who's going to help the people who's willing to fight? As Dr. Abdullah said, Martin Luther King said a long time ago when his nonviolence, because people say, I want to be violent. He said, even if I was against nonviolence, I wasn't, excuse me, he said, if I wasn't against nonviolence for pragmatic reasons, I would have to be against nonviolence. He said, we can't battle these people. We don't have the numbers. We don't have the codes. We don't have the military operation to be able to go up against them. So we have to do something, not just from a spiritual standpoint, from that standpoint. He said, we have to do something collectively together. So now when we start to think about all of these things, I want us to imagine this. I want us to imagine this. What if we had people who stood on a platform of truth, justice, and love for everybody and wanted equality, wanted everybody to be able to go where you say, hey, as much as you can do and you can achieve in a positive way, let's go it. Let's do it. But we know in our society that it's an unfair capitalistic society. You look just at who was up at Trump's ball, and you see Elon Musk, you see Jeff Bezos, you see Zuckerberg, you see Google, you see TikTok, you see how this oligarchy that Joe Biden tried to tell you on his way out, he was old, but he wasn't that old. He was telling you what it was. And we had people who wanted to dismantle the oligarchy. Brother Jermaine, we got him on the line. All right, Dr. Abdullah, you back with us?
I'm back.
See,
thank you. The old school phone works best.
hey, listen. See, this how I know that you were worried, because usually sometimes people have technical difficulties. That's the way to say, "Hey, I tried. It ain't nothing." But the fact that you persevered through it has let us know what we would have had in another, AKA Madam Vice President. But we were kind of talking about this on the line before, though. Honestly, like, what were some of the things that you all had on the platform? You and Dr. West saying, "This is how we bring truth, justice, and love." To this dynasty, this colonial way of America, to make it truly what the Constitution said it was going to be, even though they didn't follow it.
Right. Well, I mean, everything from reparations, and I mean real reparations that comes with a check, to land back for indigenous people, to a livable wage, a truly livable wage, federal minimum wage of $28 an hour, to all kinds of things like guaranteed housing, which we could have guaranteed housing for everybody in this country if we weren't spending trillions of dollars on war. So an immediate end to funding Israel and funding endless war. All of that was on our agenda, and we would have had a very rapid fire first day as well, full of executive orders, but they would have been in the exact opposite direction.
So let me ask you this, because I'm all for ending the genocide in Palestine. But from a geopolitical context, that people will tell you, Joe Biden has said a long time ago, he said that if Israel didn't exist, America would need it to exist. And that's because of her ways and what she wants to do. Now, if we're for true justice and love, but understand all of those things, how do you negotiate with Israel, with somebody like a Bibi Netanyahu who wants to demolish it? I don't know if it's to try to create their Ben Gurion Suez Canal, or if they just want to extinguish all of the Palestinians for whatever reasons. How do you negotiate that, not only because from a level of moral civility, but within the context of the world and geopolitical context?
Well, one, if we stop funding Israel, that there'll be much less possibility for them to continue as the colonial power, as the genocidal power that they are. I don't think that there is room for negotiation with a Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is a terrorist. Netanyahu is who he is. And so we have to say, is the United States going to participate in and fund genocide? Are we going to
Which we have been doing.
Right. Or are we going to say we're reserving those dollars for ourselves, for the betterment of our people? And that's where Dr. West and I were, is that the United States needs to also think about what it seeks to be, right? Do we seek to be the dominators of the world, or do we seek to be a nation among nations? And Dr. West and I are committed to building a world, whether we're in office or not, of being a nation within nations.
And one of the things that I love about that, I know we kind of talked about foreign, but as we kind of move it back to domestic lands, I know that you are so heavily involved in Black Lives Matter grassroots, and you're talking about what are some of the things, and I love how you're saying get guaranteed housing, move the minimum wage up. What are some of the things that BLMM grassroots are doing right now on the ground from a proactive manner to be able to make something better where other people listening from other states, from other regions might be able to say, hey, let us duplicate this. Let us try to do this also in our area and collectively work together to put pressure on the system?
Sure. Black Lives Matter Grassroots is 39 chapters on the ground throughout the country. So we want to be very clear that we're the original formation of Black Lives Matter, that we are what you think of or what you thought of when you thought about the movement of regular people
Boots
who
on
are
the
committed.
ground.
Boots on the ground. Boots on the ground. That's what Black Lives Matter Grassroots is. We have 39 chapters that include a Milwaukee chapter that's led by the family of Alvin Cole. You'll remember Alvin Cole was killed by police there in Milwaukee, and his sister Talivia Cole and mother run that chapter. And so if you're in Milwaukee, we want you to get involved in Black Lives Matter Milwaukee and say we want justice for the three. And of course, Alvin Cole is at the center of that. All throughout the country, though, what we're working to do is to dismantle a system of policing that descends from slave catching.
Come on.
Right? So we got to be very real about what policing is. Policing comes from patty rollers. Policing comes from slave catchers. And policing has never kept Black communities safe. And so Black Lives Matter Grassroots is committed to building systems of public safety that are grounded in community, the things that we know actually keep us safe. And that's tied to a federal minimum wage. That's tied to universal housing. In fact, when we study what creates the safest communities, we know that the safest communities are the communities with the most resources, not the most police. So when you have quality after school programs for our children, you virtually eliminate what they call youth crime, right? When you have guaranteed housing, when you have guaranteed income, universal basic income, you actually eliminate upwards of 80% of so-called crime, because more than 90% of crime is actually crime of need. And so when you meet those needs and when you pour resources into communities rather than more than 50% of most cities' general funds into police, right? If you take those dollars and you fund resources, you actually build safer communities. So Black Lives Matter Grassroots is very committed to doing just that, to looking at alternatives to policing and community-based public safety, as well as kind of a restructuring and reimagining of the world that we live in.
So I want to ask you this, because I think some people get it confused, because, you know, we hear the cry, defund the police. And I tell people, you got to understand what people are saying. When they're talking about defund the police, they're saying going into putting money into good money after bad money in a system we don't know works. When I listen to you talk about defund the police, really what you're talking about is how do we reallocate these funds in a manner that really benefits the citizenry? Can you give me an example of one of those ways you would reallocate the funds that's usually given into our military or pseudo-military, also known as the police?
Yeah, I mean, one of the successful examples that we saw on a very small scale is in LAUSD. So as in Los Angeles, we were yelling defund the police, and we were successful in getting some of those dollars taken away from LAPD. So we were able to get $150 million cut from LAPD. Which amounted to a very small percentage of their $3.4 billion budget. Now it's bloated to over $4 billion budget, right? Our young people, who are always the most courageous and audacious and visionary, they said, nah, we want to defund school police. So they were able to cut the school police fund by 35%. And what did they do with those dollars? They poured them into something called the Black Student Achievement Plan. $110 million annual funding specifically for Black students in LAUSD. What has that meant? It's meant community safety teams in their schools. What has that meant? It's meant that our children, our Black children, get to go on HBCU tours that are paid for not by their parents, but by the school district. What that's meant for me personally, as a mother of 3 LAUSD children, is I watched my middle child go from having school police called on her 8 times in a single semester, from things like having a look in her eye to having slime in her pocket. She went from that to being brought on this HBCU tour, being brought to the Black College Expo, and she is now a straight A student at Southern University at Baton Rouge. She is at Southern University because of that investment in the Black Student Achievement Plan. That's what can happen when we defund school police. Imagine what happens when we defund police in our cities and flood our cities with resources for our people.
Queen, let me ask you this question, because what you say, it says, it's so simple. It makes so much sense. But they said the reason the system doesn't work is because it's not supposed to work. In fact, the system works the way it's supposed to. So since we know it's against the grain of the system of capitalism, other oligarchs and plutocrats, to be able to have this level of equality that would bring a change in society, and they want to keep people oppressed, they want to keep a marginalized community, how do we fight against that system that they know the answers but won't really invest in those answers? How do we change that?
Well, I think we have to be willing to be abolitionists. And so people hear the term a lot, but don't always know what it means. What it means is we have to get beyond the narrative of and rhetoric of police reform. And I know that scares people to say that, but police are an irredeemable system. So when we lift up the fact that policing descends from slave catching, and as ridiculous as it would have been,
exactly the same.
They look exactly the same. It would have been ridiculous to say, let's just reform slavery, right? That's a wild thing to say. So why would you say, let's reform policing that's a part of that system? Instead, we have to abolish systems, any system that comes from chattel slavery, and instead build up something new. So I think it becomes a lot less scary when you say we don't want to abolish public safety. But public safety means making sure that we have resources in our community. And if you look at communities, I'll give another example.
Wait, can I just pause you 1 second, Dr.
Yeah,
Abdullah?
please.
Please hold that thought. I just want everybody to listen and say, this is who could have been our vice president. So when we think about how we vote and who we say we're not voting for, please listen to those people who are running and really want to do something for us before we just dismiss them because of the things that we hear that's controlled by this duopoly. Go ahead, Dr. Abdullah. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for that, brother. And I think that's right. Like, we have to be visionary. We have to be audacious. We have to be truthful in our speaking and in our stance, and in what we're willing to work towards. And so I just wanted to uplift that, these reimagined views of public safety and reimagined approaches to public safety actually do work. So in Newark, New Jersey, where we have Mayor Raz Baraka, who is willing to courageously invest in community safety teams, we've seen especially violent crime go down. And that's what we have to be working towards.
But you on the radio, so you know what that music means. That means we got to take one more break, but we're going to come right back and we're going to be closing up with Dr. Melina Abdullah, also known as Doc Melly Mel. You're listening to Nyumba Upendo on WNOV 860 AM, 106.5 FM. See you in a second. But I want to ask you, you have so much passion and so much fire. I said, this is something that's built in a person's DNA. And I was reading up on you and I read about some stories about your granddad. And I was wondering if you could just tell us like where that passion comes and like the history, a little bit of your family. I know we're running out of time, but just a little bit so the people know why this fire runs so deep inside of you.
Wow. So that's a long story. I'll say that who I credit, who I emulate, who I strive to be like is the best person that I've ever met in the world. The best human being that I know is my mother. I think most people think that about their mother, but my mother is a phenomenal human being. And she taught me really early and walked the walk, right? Like, listen to God, listen to God, honor your ancestors. My mother is a Black woman who was raised in the segregated South in Beaumont, Texas, became a school teacher and became really the teacher of our neighborhood. My mom, I was raised in Oakland, California. She was that mama. And my mama was the one who, when the car hit the block, all the kids ran to our front porch and would yell, "Time for school." And my mom would sit there on the front porch and teach all the kids in the neighborhood to read until it got dark outside, right? My mother is brilliant and doesn't always have to be as out front with her brilliance. Like, she believes her brilliance has to show itself through the love that she pours into community. And so my gauge for whether I'm on the right track is always checking in with my mom and seeing what she thinks. And so that's where I would say I got my, I try to get my inspiration from and try to kind of, who I try to model myself after is my mother.
You're making her proud. Hey, we got a caller. We got only a few seconds. Okay. Oh, he hung up. He had been waiting for a while. We had a couple of callers that were on one to get to you, but with the technical difficulty, our time is running low. And Brother Reverend Al Sharpton comes on next. And when he comes on, he just cuts us off. So I want you to give me your last and final words. And a promise that you're going to come back. But give me your last and final words to the Milwaukee audience of what you want us to remember as far as what we need to do. The question King asked is, where do we go from here? So what's your answer to that, Queen?
Sure. So, as we face down the devil incarnate, the answer is not to become scared. The answer is to organize. And so that means making sure that you plug in with organizations that are doing good work. That's how we keep ourselves safe. That's how we arm ourselves, but that's also how we move forward. So in Milwaukee, we want you to plug in with Black Lives Matter Milwaukee, with Talivia Cole and Black Lives Matter Milwaukee, and be part of that fight for justice for the three, including Alvin Cole. Wherever you are in this country, please plug in with BLM Grassroots. We're BLM Grassroots on all social media and blmgrassroots.org. Do the work. Do the work that's necessary to build the kind of world that we want for ourselves, that we want for our children. Don't look to somebody else. You sure can't look to elected officials or the federal government to give us freedom right now. And so we got to be the resistance to that, and we got to be the counter to that. We got to push good in the face of evil.
And what can I say? The word, I want to repeat what you said before, is we have to become abolitionists. And that means we have to abolish evil. And what do we replace that with? With truth, with justice, with love. Dr. Melina Abdullah, I'd like to thank you for joining us on the Nyumba Upendo Show. I'd like to thank you and the listening audience for working with us to our little technical difficulties. But you know what? When something is good, it's always going to be something to try to block it. So I pray that you were able to ascertain the information you were supposed to get, but not only listen, but to make sure you do, to make sure you go out and you be the best that you can be. Let's not just talk about King. Let's build on it so somebody can talk about us tomorrow as we talk about King. Listen, you've been listening to the Nyumba Upendo Show. I'm your host, Kwaku Amawasi. We'll see you next week at 11 a.m. Nakupenda, Milwaukee. That means we love you.